So today we're going to be considering the combination of the practices of Kriya Yoga, as made popular by Paramahansa Yogananda, as well as those practices of Vichara, or self-inquiry. Ramana Maharshi is probably the most well-known modern teacher in this regard. So I've always had an interest in these two practices, these two paths. And the more I explored Kriya Yoga and the more I practiced and the more I read about Ramana Maharshi and applied his method of asking, who am I? The more I started to see that these really weren't two separate paths. They're actually just part of the whole system. Although we do have to be aware that this is a common thing to take bits and pieces of a system and specialize on one of them and act like it's something separate by itself. We see this in Hatha Yoga, where we have all these different kinds of ways of practicing Hatha Yoga and all these marketed name brands, but really it's all Hatha Yoga. So when it comes to Kriya Yoga and Vichara, the reason I enjoy combining these two is because Kriya Yoga, the techniques, the philosophy, allows one to very proactively balance the nervous system, calm down the mind, and internalize attention. And when you come at self-inquiry or meditation from this place, you're much more likely to get better results with self-inquiry. Now, it must be said that if you have the capacity to sit still and simply inquire, who am I, until direct realization dawns, this talk may not necessarily be appropriate to you. But if you're one of those individuals who find that it's helpful to go through some sort of procedure to assist with the self-inquiry path, then I think you'll probably benefit quite a bit from this. And many of you already know that this is the subject, the whole topic of the book that I just released called Kriya Yoga Vichara. And in that book, we do go over the Kriya Yoga techniques, the ones learned during initiation. We do go over the capacity to contemplate. We go over how to combine and integrate self-inquiry with Kriya Yoga. But really, it's very simple. You just do your Kriya Yoga practices. And then after you're calm and clear, you sit quietly and reflect on, who am I, until realization dawns. And going back to the idea of how they are together all the time, they've never really been separated, is that this whole discovery of the self is central to all yogic enlightenment traditions. It's one of the reasons why Yogananda called his organization Self-Realization Fellowship. And as you know, if you've read Autobiography of a Yogi, at least the current editions, I don't think it was in the very original edition, but Yogananda actually visited Ramana Maharshi in India and had a conversation with him. So Yogananda obviously saw some value in Ramana Maharshi's approach. So how do we do it? Well, you need to learn the Kriya techniques. And even if you don't know Kriya techniques, you can begin with something as simple as mantra or simple breath awareness, learning to hold your awareness on your breath or hold your awareness on a mantra. Now, after you do this for your set period of time, whether it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then you sit quietly, observing your current state of consciousness. If you still have a lot of thoughts going on, a lot of distractions, well then, do it again. Eventually you'll get to a point where things are a bit more settled than usual. And once you're at that point, then you can begin practicing vichara or self-inquiry, and it's very simple. You begin to reflect on what you are, beyond your name, your form, your personality, your history. So this is quite a subtle process, and you have to be able to stay alert and engaged. And this is where a lot of people get tripped up, which again is why other meditation procedures or Kriya Yoga can be so helpful. Because when most people turn their attention within, they're so caught up in the distractions of their mind, the things they're thinking about, their belief systems, who they are, that they can't quite turn their attention and focus on one particular thing. And this is what's key to make any kind of contemplative practice, vichara, self-inquiry, work well, is that you ask the question, and then you sit internalized, waiting for the response. Who am I? Or what am I? That's another good question. What am I? You feel it, you experience it, you wait. And if you've done your previous meditation techniques right, and your mind is already fairly calm, then you're waiting in that silence, that stillness. And that's when it's going to be more likely that you hear the response. And again, the response is not going to be a voice coming out and saying, you are so-and-so, or this is what you are. It's going to be a direct experience, a direct experience. And you're not going to be able to talk about it. You're not going to be able to run to your friend and say, oh my God, I've had this experience, and this is exactly what it was like. You're going to be able to feel it, experience it, be it. And then you ask yourself again, is this really me? This is how I like to approach it. Is this really me? And we keep following this, seeing that we're developing almost like a conversation internally with ourselves. And one of the final stages that I enjoy is asking who or what is aware of this experience. Who or what is aware of this experience? Because the thing is, you can only really be yourself. Ultimately, you are experiencing yourself, because you're experiencing yourself always. Everything is yourself. But when it comes right down to it, it is the being that is the most important. Because the experience that you have, those are things that are always going to rise and fall. So any experience, whether it's a sensation, an observation, a realization, that can change over time because it appeared. But when you have that knowing, that being, where you don't have to experience anything, you still don't have to define yourself, your self-realization towards any particular experience, and you can exist there, hold your attention there, then you're doing the contemplative process in a way that I think leads to the best results, if we want to be results-oriented in this situation. But, we'll never realize anything if we just kind of sit around. Or who knows, maybe if we would just sit around and not do anything, we'd realize it all. But these are the mystical conundrums of trying to talk about the spiritual path. And it's one of the reasons it makes it so difficult, because you can talk to people and they'll talk you in circles with all kinds of funny phrases like this. But ultimately, forget about the funny phrases, forget about the deep wisdom that you think you just heard, or that you think other people say, and just learn to practice a meditation technique that calms your mind, settles you down. That's it, just do that. Figure out whatever it takes and do that. Once you can calm your mind and sit down, then reflect upon, contemplate, what are you? What are you really? Really get into it, and don't let your attention waver. And for most people, this is going to feel really boring, and you're not going to be able to do it real well, because most people really aren't that interested in what they are. When it comes to spirituality, they're interested in other things, like feeling good or being part of a group. But if you're not quite there, and you have just this burning desire to completely, honestly know and be what you are, then find that meditation technique that works to calm you down, and you have to work it. Too often, and I do go over this quite a lot in the book, Kriya Yoga Vichara, too often people, they begin a meditation practice and they say they're not doing it well, because all these thoughts and memories and emotions come up. And so then they say, I got to go find another meditation technique. Or this Swami came through town, this Sri Swami, famous whatever yogi, and he's got to have the best technique. Or this new non-dualist teacher just has the most inspiring presence, and I'm sure they can teach it to me. Well, forget about all that stuff. Because if you just use any technique that allows you to sit down and focus, yes, you're going to have distractions arise, and you're going to say to yourself, I'm not meditating well. Because if I was meditating well, then I would be experiencing what all these other people say, which is calmness and clarity and whatnot. But you're not going to get to that calmness and clarity until you work through, process, and digest all these things that are within your consciousness that you've not taken the time to become conscious of and release your attachment to. Again, Yogananda was said to have said, I'm not sure, I've never actually read this, I just heard someone tell me, that the majority of the spiritual path, 90% of it is really making yourself psychologically healthy. The other 10%, once you're psychologically healthy, happens naturally. All right? So part of the whole meditation is teaching you to sit down, be quiet. Once you can sit down, be quiet, you focus on something. So you learn to strengthen your willpower, your attention to hold in one spot. thoughts, memories, emotions arise, that's when you say, I'm not meditating right, I need a new technique. But you have to stay there in that space, just breathing or focusing, until eventually they don't rise as much. Eventually they won't rise at all. But that can take weeks, months, years, right? Depends on how much you hold on to, your accumulated baggage. We're all different in that regard. But all of us have to go through that. If anyone tells you otherwise, they're just trying to hypnotize you, and it's not going to have any real spiritual value. You're just kind of suppressing the issue for a little while, but you're going to have to come back and look at it. And then once you get to a point where you're mostly calm and clear, then you can start really having that conversation with yourself of, what am I? What is my relationship to God? What is my relationship to divine consciousness? And it becomes as though you're having this living, breathing, again, relationship with yourself. And that's what all the saints and mystics, when they talk about hearing that still small voice within, or when they talk about being in communion with God or divine consciousness, it's all about learning how to do that, and it takes years. And it takes a subtle intelligence, and it takes the ability to sit still and be quiet, essentially. So your first step might just be, how can I force myself to sit still and be quiet? Once you can do that, then you can start focusing on a meditation technique, because then your next step is, all right, now that I can sit still and be quiet, how can I focus my attention on this one point? Because why is that so important? Well, we're following the steps of yoga as they're described in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. We're moving from asana, sitting quietly, to pranayama, circulating life force to work out any astral issues, karmic issues, to pratyahara, internalizing your attention, to dharana and dhyana, focus and attention. And once you can focus and be attentive to something, then you experience samadhi, oneness, cognitive absorption. Because you have to be able to sink your attention fully in it. So part of the training is learning to do that. And once you can do that, then you can ask the question, who am I? What am I? What is aware of this experience? And you'll be able to stay alert and awake and perceptive enough that when the realization dawns, you'll recognize it. And once you recognize it, then you start to go a little deeper into it, to ask, how can I maintain this? And that's the work that you're doing, essentially, in any kind of spiritual growth, at least the yogic processes that I know of. But with Kriya Yoga Vichara, I find that to be the way it goes. So consider that. At AshevilleVedicAstrology.com, there's a Learn Kriya Yoga tab. So, on this channel, there's plenty of videos. You can get pretty much all you need just by watching this particular channel. Go to the playlists and look at the Learn Kriya Yoga playlist. That'll go over many of the techniques that are covered in Kriya Yoga initiations. I even think there's a few videos on there dealing with contemplation. But if you go to AshevilleVedicAstrology.com and the Learn Kriya Yoga tab, hopefully I'll be able to update my site in the next week or so. But there'll be links to the 2 books I have on Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga, Continuing the Lineage of Enlightenment. Kriya Yoga Vichara, Integrated Techniques and Philosophy of Ramana Maharshi and Paramahansa Yogananda. 2 downloadable audio courses. And there is also a link to the free information, which is pretty much all you need again. But if you want to support this work, feel free to consider these books or those downloadable classes. And my emphasis, my goal is to work with people who are already at the point where they're ready to start turning their attention within, or who don't have their life situation set up that they're able to make this a priority for them. Also, my views of guru and the idea of guru is very different. In my mind, a guru should not require a disciple to pledge their unfailing loyalty. In my mind, it should go the other way. The guru is the adult in the relationship, right? If we think of it that way. So isn't it more important for the adult to take care of the child? Anyway, the idea that I have of the guru is that the individual doesn't pledge their unfailing loyalty to a person. They learn to find their direct connection to God, divine consciousness. And they might have a mentor in that way. They might have a mentor that helps them. Because on the other hand, if we think about guru, the adult in the whole concept, who has the wisdom and the knowledge, it's actually more important for the guru to say, I commit to taking care of you. And this is the issue that we have to be careful of. Human beings, they're still human beings, right? I don't care who you call an avatar or not. They're still human beings. If they seem like an avatar, it's because they're really good at acting. Because we're all avatars of divine consciousness. So we need to get that out of our head, first of all. Second of all, as human beings, yes, they may have clarity, wisdom, understanding, the capacity to help you and assist you and guide you in ways that you need. But if they're going to support someone in that way, they can't support hundreds of thousands of people. To have that kind of relationship requires a lot of responsibility. It requires a lot of dedication. And very few human beings can truly commit to and support a spiritual family much larger than a few people. Which is why when it comes down to teachers and whatnot, it's ideal for the teacher to have a few people that they can work with, that they can have that kind of committed relationship with. And then those people in turn become capable, and they can do the same. And so we take one person, which branches out into 3 or 4. And of those 3 or 4, we get 12 or 16, and it'll keep branching out from there. So do bear in mind that personally, my goal is to share this information with you so that you can learn it, so that you can utilize it to the best of your ability, which is why I do these YouTube videos, created the books that I just discussed, and also the online courses. So anyway, this is some thoughts on how to integrate Kriya Yoga and Vichara. We may go over this a little more deeply in future videos, specifically looking at the process of Vichara by itself, because I've already done several videos on Kriya Yoga practices and techniques. And again, just to be clear, you can find those on the playlists of this channel under the Learn Kriya Yoga playlist. So be well. It was good speaking with you again. And keep your eyes open. I'm going to have a guest speaker on the channel here pretty soon to discuss the capacity, how one has a family and still practices meditation, yoga, Kriya Yoga, and so on. Like, how does one remain serious and dedicated in that kind of environment? Because it's hard enough to learn to practice meditation yoga when it's just you, but now you've got relationships and kids to deal with. Well, that can be somewhat overwhelming unless you're already a fairly stable person. All right, so stay tuned. Thanks.